Today, we're doing a deep dive into something that causes a lot of stress for a lot of people. We're looking inside the evaluation of immigration applications, the ones handled by IRCC.
Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada.
Exactly. And if you've ever gone through this or know somebody who has, the feeling you are laser focused on that official IRCC document checklist, it becomes your whole world. You think, okay, if I just check every single box, upload every single file they ask for, then I've met the requirements. Approval should be next.
And that's the trap.
It is. So let's unpack that, because that checklist first mentality is, well, it's dangerous. What we're seeing is that relying on it is one of the biggest misconceptions out there. Officers are looking at things far beyond just having the right number of documents.
Way beyond.
So our mission today is to give you the blueprint, what really drives the decision. And that's just essential for cutting down on those refusal risks.
We really need to shift the perspective here. The checklist, that's about submission completeness. It basically gets you in the door so your application isn't sent right back to you.
Right.
But our focus, what we're talking about today, is the decision outcome. And that is all about whether the officer is satisfied with your evidence. They're two completely different things.
That distinction is so critical. For most people, especially if you're doing this yourself, that checklist feels like the finish line.
But it's really just the starting gun. It's the absolute bare minimum you need to do to avoid getting screened out right away.
An administrative screen, they call it.
Exactly. The checklist is there to make sure the file has the minimum paperwork needed for the system to even start processing it. Think of it like a recipe.
Oh, I like that analogy.
The checklist is your list of ingredients. Flour, sugar, eggs. Okay, right. So you can have all the ingredients for a cake. You've got the flour, the sugar, everything.
Okay, right. So you can have all the ingredients for a cake. You've got the flour, the sugar, everything.
Okay.
But if you just dump them all in a bowl with no instructions,
You don't have a cake?
you just have a mess, a pile of ingredients.
Precisely. The checklist answers the question, are all the parts here? But it says nothing about how those parts will be assessed. It doesn't tell you if the officer will be convinced by the quality of those ingredients or if you've explained enough to prove your case.
So it's procedural, not persuasive.
That's the perfect way to put it.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, because we're not talking about a machine checking boxes. An officer is reviewing a life story. They don't just tally documents, they assess the whole thing, holistically.
The holistic review. That's where the application is either won or lost. The officer is literally sitting down to see if the entire package works as a single cohesive narrative.
A narrative.
Yes, and they're looking for three key things. First, does this application tell a consistent and credible story about your past, your intentions, everything?
Okay, consistency.
Second, does every single document clearly support your eligibility for the specific program you've applied for?
It has to match the program.
And third, and this is so vital, did you proactively address every potential weakness, every inconsistency? You can't make the officer guess or, assume things in your favor.
Because they won't.
They won't. If the documents contradict each other, or if there's an unexplained 6-month gap in your work history, that whole story, that narrative, it just falls apart.
And at that point, it doesn't matter that you submitted 100 documents.
It creates dissatisfaction. And that's the key. Applications get refused even when every single document from the checklist is there. The quantity was fine, but the quality of the narrative just wasn't convincing.
So let's drill down into that. Let's talk about the quality of that narrative.
Yeah.
We need to get past this idea of just collecting papers and start thinking about crafting a clear, undeniable case. This is that blueprint we promised, the 5 factors that really drive an officer's decision.
And these factors, they really explain why so many applications are refused, often to the complete shock of the applicant. It's all about the integrity of the information you're providing.
Okay, let's start with the first one. It feels basic, but it trips so many people up. Consistency across all information.
It's foundational. Officers are actively cross-referencing everything you give them. The dates on your university degree, the dates on your employment letters, your bank statements, your travel history forms. Everything has to line up perfectly.
We always think about the big dramatic mistakes, like a forged document or something. But what I'm hearing is that it's the tiny little administrative errors that can kill your credibility.
Absolutely. Think about this. Say an applicant calls themselves a marketing specialist on their application form, but their official reference letter says digital media coordinator.
Okay.
Or maybe a letter says they left a job on March 31, but their tax documents show they were paid until mid-April.
I see.
These little things, these mismatched dates or job titles, if you don't explain them upfront in a letter of explanation, they don't just look like typos. To an officer, it can look like you're trying to hide something. It triggers a much deeper, more skeptical look at everything else.
That makes total sense. And if that consistency is the foundation, it leads the officer right to the next big question. Factor 2. The credibility of your narrative. They start asking, can I actually trust what this person is telling me?
Precisely. Credibility isn't a given. You have to build it with a coherent submission. The officer is looking at everything and asking, is this believable? Does this make sense in the real world?
Can you give us an example of where credibility breaks down?
Of course. A huge one is finances. Let's say you claim you've saved $80,000 in the last year and a half, but your employment records show a pretty modest salary.
Red flag.
A massive red flag. Or they see a huge unexplained cash deposit into your bank account just a few weeks before you apply. They're immediately going to question where that money came from and if it's genuinely yours to use. The credibility of your financial situation is suddenly in doubt.
You mentioned explaining things proactively, and that's a perfect lead into factor 3. Clarity of explanations. I think a lot of people, especially doing it themselves, just assume the officer will connect the dots.
And that's a core mistake. Officers are under no obligation at all to infer your meaning or guess your intent. The burden, to be clear, is 100% on you, the applicant.
So if you have a weird career change, say you were a successful engineer and then you ran a coffee shop for a year,
you have to explain the logic. Why did you make that shift? You have to solve the puzzle for them before they even see it as a puzzle.
What are the most common things that absolutely demand an explanation?
Well, aside from the financial stuff we just talked about, employment gaps are huge. A 6-month break between jobs, don't just leave it blank on the form. Explain it. Was it travel, family care, an unsuccessful job search? Be honest.
Okay.
Also, inconsistent timelines, changing your major halfway through university, even a complicated family relationship that you're using for the application. If it looks even slightly confusing on paper, write a clear, separate explanation. Don't make the officer work to understand your life story.
Any unexplained issue just pushes them towards saying no.
It pushes them toward dissatisfaction. Exactly.
Okay, this brings us to a more technical area. Factor 4. Alignment with program eligibility requirements. So it's not just about having a job, it's about having the right kind of job for the program you're applying to.
That's it. This is where a job title alone is almost useless. Canadian immigration programs are built around the National Occupational Classification System, the NOC. The officer isn't just looking at your job title. They are reading the list of duties in your reference letter and comparing it directly to the official definition in the NOC.
So they're checking if what you actually did matches what Canada considers that job to be.
100%. Imagine you apply under a program that needs 1 year of management experience. Your letter says your title was project lead.
Sounds good, right? Yeah, sounds managerial.
But then the officer reads your duties and sees that 90% of your time was administrative work and you had no power to hire, fire, or manage a budget. In the officer's eyes, you weren't a manager under the NOC definition. The document was there, but the content failed to align with the program's rules.
And that leads us perfectly to the last, and maybe the most subtle factor. Factor 5, sufficiency of evidence. Not just its presence, the difference between ticking a box and actually proving your point.
Sufficiency is the final quality check. The evidence has to be adequate to prove the claim. So for that job letter, it's not enough to say, I worked at company X. It has to detail the high-skill duties that prove you meet the program's requirements. It has to demonstrate the relevance and the level of the work you did.
Because it's the detail that makes it sufficient.
It is. And same with money. It is not sufficient to just show a bank statement with a certain balance on one day. The officer needs to see a clear paper trail. Where did the funds come from? This is where credibility and sufficiency really merge together.
A sudden, unexplained loan right before applying.
Is not sufficient evidence. The document is there, the bank statement, but it fails to prove the underlying claim that you have available unencumbered funds. The officer is not satisfied.
Okay, this has really clarified the high bar you need to clear. But now we have to talk about something that's really painful for applicants. This huge misconception that, well, if something is a little unclear, IRCC will just ask. They'll just send a little email asking for clarification before they refuse you, right? I mean, why wouldn't they?
That assumption is so dangerous because it gives you this false sense of security. The reality is, officers are explicitly not obligated to request more information.
Not at all.
Not at all. If the application is considered complete enough to begin processing, they can make a decision on it as is. Think about the sheer volume of applications they get. If a file isn't clear, if it doesn't satisfy them, the incentive is often to make a decision and move on.
So if they review your application and those 5 factors, consistency, credibility, clarity, alignment, and sufficiency, if they aren't all met,
they can, and often do, just refuse the application right then and there. They adjudicate based on the materials you submitted. The burden of proof is always 100% on you, the applicant. You should never ever count on getting a second chance to clarify.
So what you're really telling me is the officer starts their review almost looking for a reason to say no unless you make the case absolutely undeniable from the very beginning.
You have to make it easy for them to say yes.
The whole strategy has to shift. It's not about gathering documents, it's about packaging them perfectly.
That's the pivot. So many refusals happen because of how the information was explained or not explained. It's often a failure of communication, not a real lack of eligibility.
So let's wrap this part up with some core advice. How can someone apply these 5 factors when they're putting their own application together?
Okay, the most practical first step. Before you submit anything, make a master timeline, a simple spreadsheet. List every single date from every document, education, jobs, travel, and then you manually cross-reference them. This is how you patch those small credibility-killing mistakes before the officer does.
That's a great tip.
Second, you must write a targeted, comprehensive letter of explanation. This is your chance to control the narrative. Don't just repeat what's obvious from the forms. Use it to explain those employment gaps, to explain a weird career change, the source of a large gift. You have to make sure every single piece of evidence clearly and sufficiently supports the claims you're making.
So to bring it all back to our main theme, the document checklist gets your application in the door. It ensures completeness. But it's the officer's assessment of consistency, credibility, clarity, and alignment that actually determines the outcome.
Exactly.
Success is not about hitting some document quota. It's about mastering the quality and the coherence of your application story.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to consider. If the burden of proof is entirely on you, the applicant, and the officer is under zero obligation to ask you any questions, Where should you strategically put most of your effort? Is it getting the documents, or is it crafting that narrative? The letters of explanation, the structure that links them all together flawlessly for an officer who will only look at your file once. Think about that. The strategic value of clear, persuasive communication versus just having a stack of paper.
So if you've stayed with us until the end of this episode, one thing should be very clear by now. Most DIY applicants who get refused are not refused because they aren't qualified. They're refused because their application didn't clearly communicate that qualification to the officer.
Exactly. And that's the part many people underestimate. It's not just about having the right documents. It's about whether those documents work together as a clear, logical case from an officer's perspective.
So before we wrap up, we want to leave you with one very practical option. If you're a DIY applicant, your documents are mostly ready, but you're still asking yourself, if I were an IRCC officer, would this application actually make sense to me?
In that situation, you don't necessarily need someone to file the application for you. But having an officer-focused IRCC document review before submission can help you identify clarity gaps, inconsistencies, or risk points that are easy to miss when you're too close to your own case.
You can find more information about Fly to Canada's IRCC document review through the link in the description. Just to be clear, this is not a filing service, and it does not guarantee approval. Its purpose is simple: to help you communicate your eligibility clearly, consistently, and effectively before you submit.
And if you're still in the learning phase, if you want to better understand how IRCC officers actually assess applications, what they look for beyond the checklist, and how real-world decisions are made,
you can also explore the Fly to Canada IRCC Knowledge Hub, linked in the description. It's designed to help you think like an officer before submission, not after receiving a refusal.
Because in immigration, prevention is always far less costly than repair.
You've already done the hard part by qualifying. The final step is making sure your application proves it, without ambiguity.
If you found this episode helpful, please consider subscribing, sharing it with others, and leaving us a comment about where you are in your application process.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.